The pen moved once, clean, decisive, the way Tae-hyun Kwan had signed every document for the past 14 years. Across the table on the 41st floor of Kwan Tower, the man was still talking. Employees, families, and second chances. Tae-hyun did not look up. He signed. He left. 6:47 p.m. That was the Tae-hyun Kwan that Chicago knew. 40 minutes later, none of it mattered. He stood on W47th Street with a dead engine behind him and wind that didn't soften itself for men in expensive coats. 20 feet away, under a streetlight that couldn't commit to staying on, a woman-thin coat, 2 grocery bags, the kind of stillness that comes from carrying too much for too long. She looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't look at him the way this city did, calculating, wanting, cautious. She looked at him the way a person looks at the thing they fear most, and she still didn't run. Tae-hyun Kwan had made an entire city careful about how it said his name. But this woman, 2 bags of cheap groceries on a forgotten street corner, did the one thing no one had managed in 7 years. She made him stop. Hey, before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are and what time it is where you live. I want to know who's staying up for this one. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this story only gets heavier from here and you do not want to miss what's coming. Stay with me. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't need to. He already recognized something in those eyes, the particular look of someone who had once trusted him completely and learned exactly what that cost. 3 hours before W47th Street, Tae-hyun Kwan stood beneath the chandeliers of the Harrington Ballroom on the 34th floor of the Ardmore Grand and performed the version of himself that Chicago found easiest to understand. He shook hands. He answered questions in sentences short enough to prevent follow-up. He accepted a glass of champagne he never touched and set it on the nearest surface 11 minutes later. Around him, the city's money moved in formal wear. Developers, politicians, old names married to new ones. They laughed carefully near him. They smiled with the particular effort of people trying not to look like they were trying. Tae-hyun noticed all of it. He just didn't care. Kwan Holdings had been built on the bones of what came before it. A decade ago, the Kwan Network had controlled 3 of Chicago's northern cargo routes, the kind of business that didn't appear in annual filings and didn't need to. Now it was acquisition reports and conference rooms and a philanthropy division with its own publicist. Everything laundered clean through time and lawyers and the city's collective decision that it preferred Tae-hyun Kwan legitimate over the alternative. He had accepted that arrangement. But the thing about performing a version of yourself long enough, you forget what the original felt like. By 6:31 p.m., he was done. The car pulled from the Ardmore Grand into the slow current of Michigan Avenue. Tae-hyun loosened his tie, leaned back, and watched the city lights blur behind tinted glass. His phone rang at 6:39 p.m. Soo-jin Kwan, he answered. You left before dessert, his mother said. Her voice carried the particular quality of a woman who considered patience a performance she had long mastered. I had enough. Claire Yates was asking about you again. A pause timed for effect. She comes from the right kind of family, Tae-hyun. She understands what the Kwan name requires. No, you can't build something that lasts by yourself. I said no. Silence. Then, softer and considerably more dangerous. You can't spend the rest of your life standing guard over a wound that has already closed. Tae-hyun ended the call. He stared at the phone for a moment afterward. Not because her words had landed wrong, because they had landed at all. 7 years. He had rebuilt an empire in 7 years, had cleared the last traces of the old business, had put his name on buildings and foundations and quarterly earnings reports that made serious people in serious rooms treat him with serious respect. And still, the question he had never answered stayed exactly where he had buried it. Sir. The driver's voice came quiet from the front seat. Something's wrong with the engine. The car rolled to the curb at the corner of W47th Street and S. Paulina Avenue. Tae-hyun stepped out. The neighborhood didn't bother with transitions. 1 mile from the financial district, and it simply decided to stop performing. Tired buildings. Paint that had surrendered years ago. A barber shop with a handwritten sign in the window and iron bars on the door. Wind moving through the empty street like it owned the place, which at this hour it more or less did. He stood by the car while the driver called for a replacement. The cold arrived immediately. The specific cold of Chicago in November that doesn't negotiate with coats. Then he saw her, 20 feet away, under a streetlight that flickered every 4 seconds without apology. A woman in a thin beige coat that was not built for this temperature, holding 2 plastic grocery bags, her shoulders carrying something that had nothing to do with the weight in her hands. Head lowered. Still, he recognized the shape of her before he recognized her face. Then she lifted her head. The world didn't stop dramatically, it simply went quiet. The way a room goes quiet when something true walks into it. Amara. She was thinner than he remembered. Her face held the particular tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. The kind built from years of solving impossible problems alone at 2 a.m. with no one to split the weight with. But her eyes were exactly the same. Dark and steady, looking at him now the way you look at the thing you have spent years learning how to survive. Before he could speak, a small figure stepped out from behind her. A boy, 7 years old at most, hair that curled at the edges. Dark eyes with a shape that Taehyun had seen in exactly one other face in his entire life. His own. Amara's hand found the boy's shoulder. Her voice came out carefully, the way a person speaks when they have practiced for conversation they hoped would never come. Good evening, Mr. Kwon, not Taehyun? Not the name she had once said across a kitchen table at 7 a.m., half awake, reaching for coffee. Not the name she had said the night he told her he didn't believe in most things, but he believed in this. Mr. Kwon, the name you use for a stranger. He didn't call out. He waited until she had walked half a block with the boy close at her side, then followed. Far enough behind that she wouldn't turn and see, close enough that he didn't lose her in the dark. She turned onto S. Oakley Avenue and stopped in front of building 2847. 4 floors, brick peeling in long strips. A ground floor window covered with plastic sheeting held by tape. The entrance light buzzed. Not quite off. Never quite working. Taehyun stood across the street and looked at it for a long time. Then he moved to the side where a curtain hung half open over a lit window. A narrow table. 2 chairs that didn't match. A small heater in the corner working harder than it should have to. A shelf with a few items arranged with the careful precision of someone who owns very little and tends to what they have. Amaris set the grocery bags down, opened a container of soup, and ladled most of it into a bowl for the boy. Her own portion was noticeably, deliberately smaller. The boy looked at both bowls. Mama, yours is too small. I already ate at work. She looked away when she said it. She was lying. Taehyun could see it in the half-second she turned her face from the child before answering. He had built his first fortune-reading rooms. He knew a lie worn smooth from repetition. Then Amara looked up, not directly at him. The curtain in the dark gave him cover, but her gaze moved toward the window the way a person's does when they feel something without being able to name it. Her hand went still on the table. Her chin lifted slightly. 2 seconds. Neither of them moved. Then Kai said something and she turned back to him, and whatever she had sensed dissolved back into the noise of a Tuesday night in November. Taehyun stepped back from the window. He had negotiated with men who had leverage over things he loved. He had held boardrooms by saying nothing. He had walked into rooms where the odds were not in his favor and walked out having changed the math. He had never felt less powerful in his life. What Taehyun did not know, standing motionless in the dark across from that building, was that the answer to every question he had buried for 7 years had been living 4 miles from his tower this entire time, and the person who put her there had been sitting across from him at dinner every single Sunday. The penthouse was exactly as he had left it. Quiet, expensive, indifferent. Soo-jin Kwon sat in the main sitting room with a cup of tea and the particular composure of a woman who had been waiting, not anxiously but strategically. She looked up when Taehyun entered, noted his coat still on at the hour, said nothing about either. You look tired, she said. Taehyun crossed the room and stood across from her. He didn't sit. I saw Amara tonight. The cup paused halfway to her lips. 1 second, the length of a real reaction. Then the mask returned so smoothly that a person who hadn't been watching for it would have missed the seam entirely. Soo-jin set the cup down with steady hands. After all this time, she said. Her tone was careful, practiced. The specific flatness of someone reciting a line they had rehearsed for a conversation they had always known might come. Taehyun heard it immediately. A person genuinely surprised asks questions. Where did you see her? What did she say? How did she look? Soo-jin had not asked a single one. She had arrived at conclusions before the facts were offered. She had a boy with her, Taehyun said. Something moved behind his mother's eyes. Controlled. Gone in under a second. I see. His eyes, mother. Soo-jin stood. Taehyun. Women in her position have always known exactly how to. Chic voiced came out, quiet. That specific quiet that people who knew him had learned to treat seriously. She looked at me like she was afraid. Not guilty, not caught, afraid. He held her gaze. Why would she be afraid of me? Soo-jin's expression cooled to its final temperature. Because people who have wronged others are always afraid of the ones they wronged. The answer came too fast. Too clean. Too ready. Taehyun looked at his mother for a long moment. The way you look at a room you've lived in your whole life when you suddenly notice a door you never opened. Then he turned and walked to his study without another word. Behind him, Soo-jin did not call his name. That was the second thing that told him everything. 11:34 p.m. Taehyun stood at the floor-to-soiling window of his private study, Chicago arranged in lights 41 floors below. He picked up his phone and called Jason Woo. Jason answered on the second ring. I need you to reopen something from 7 years ago, Taehyun said. Start from the night she left. Every record, every movement, every person my mother spoke to in the 2 weeks before and after. A brief silence, not hesitation, calculation. I'll need access to the old household files. You have it? Then I start tonight. Jason. Taehyun paused. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me what's there. I know, Jason said. That's why you called me. The line went dead. Taehyun lowered the phone and stood alone in the dark for a long time. Chicago didn't care about the questions he was carrying. It just kept going. Brilliant and cold and completely indifferent to the things people buried inside it. Sleep did not come that night, not even close. The following evening, Taehyun arrived at S. Oakley Avenue 2847 with a paper bag of groceries and no announcement. Amara opened the door and went still. "Why are you here? I brought dinner. We don't need." "I know," he said quietly. "I brought it anyway." Her face held the particular tension of a person deciding between two kinds of difficult. Before she could choose, a small voice came from somewhere behind her left shoulder. "Mama, is it the man from the street?" Kai appeared in the gap between Amara's arm and the doorframe. He looked up at Taehyun with the unsettling directness of a child who hasn't learned yet to disguise his assessments. Dark eyes, calm, measuring. "Why do you keep coming?" Kai asked. The question was completely genuine, no performance in it. Taehyun crouched to his level, something he couldn't fully explain doing, and met those eyes straight on. "Because I wanted to make sure you were both all right." Kai considered this with visible seriousness. Then he said, "We are trying." 3 words, the weight of 1,000. Amara exhaled, not quite a sigh, not quite surrender. She stepped aside. "Come in, don't stay long." The apartment in daylight was harder to look at than it had been through a window at night. The weak heater worked in short bursts. The wallpaper near the window had begun to appease. A child's drawings covered a significant portion of the wall beside the table, ships and houses and 3-person figures with uneven arms. Taehyun looked at them longer than he meant to. The following morning, Taehyun arranged appointments at Okafor Medical on N. Michigan Avenue, a private clinic, quiet, far from the parts of the city where people recognized his name and immediately began performing. Dr. Renee Okafor greeted Kai first. She crouched to his height, asked him what he thought about Tuesdays. Kai told her he thought Tuesdays were unnecessary. She laughed genuinely, and the tension in Amara's shoulders dropped a fraction. Afterward, Dr. Okafor spoke with Taehyun and Amara together, while Kai colored in the adjacent room with a nurse who had clearly done this many times. "Kai is a sweet kid." She folded her hands on the desk. "He needs consistent meals, a regular sleep schedule, and stability. Nothing here is beyond correction." She looked at Amara directly. She has been running on empty for a long time. Chronic fatigue, mild malnutrition, stress markers that suggest this has been sustained, not recent. A pause. "She doesn't need your sympathy, she needs relief." Amara lowered her eyes, a small controlled embarrassment. Taehyun felt something settle in his chest that was not sympathy. It was the particular weight of shame that doesn't announce itself. The kind that moves in quietly, finds a corner, and stays. By evening, they stood inside the small house Taehyun had prepared, a 2-bedroom on a quiet street in Bridgeport. No connection to the Kwon name, no one nearby who would report back to anyone. Kai walked in and turned a slow circle. "Mama." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's warm." Amara pressed her lips together. She turned toward the window so neither of them could fully see her face. Taehyun moved to the low bookshelf near the far wall and pulled out a book. "Do you like stories?" Kai nodded with the solemnity of someone answering an important question. "Yes, then this shelf is yours." Later, after a hot meal and the gradual, careful expansion of Kai discovering that the faucet gave hot water, and the blankets were thick and the heater ran without stopping, Taehyun sat on the edge of the boy's bed and read aloud. His voice found the rhythm slowly. Kai listened with his whole body, leaning in slightly, relaxing by degrees until his shoulders finally dropped. When the story ended, Kai looked up. "Can I ask something?" Taehyun kept his voice steady. "Anything." Kai held the edge of the blanket in both hands. His eyes were serious and dark and completely without fear. "Are you really my dad?" Amara stood in the doorway behind them. She had not made a sound. She stood perfectly still, one hand resting against the doorframe, the other at her side, not breathing, watching the two of them in the warm light of a room that had no memory of fear yet, waiting for the answer to the question she had carried alone for 7 years. Taehyun looked at her, then back at the boy. "Yes," he said. His voice broke slightly on the single syllable, and he didn't try to prevent it. "Yes, Kai, I am." None of them knew in that room with warm light and a child finally asleep without hunger that Soojin Kwon had already made 3 phone calls that evening, and the third one was the one that would change everything. 2 mornings after Kai asked if Taehyun was really his father, Soojin Kwon sat in a private corner of the Meridian Lounge on W. Wacker Drive and looked at Claire Yates the way a general looks at a piece of terrain she has already decided to use. "He's changed," Soojin said. Claire turned her coffee cup slowly. Because of her? Because of both of them? Soojin's voice held no heat. That was always the most dangerous version of her. The boy is the problem. Taehyun was manageable when this was about a woman. He is not manageable when it becomes about a child. Claire waited. "I don't need anything dramatic," Soojin said. "I only need people to remember who she is supposed to be." Claire understood. She always understood. That was why Soojin had cultivated her for 3 years. By the following morning, the words had already found their way to Gresso Cafe on W Division Street, where Amara worked 4 mornings a week. 2 women in cashmere sat at the window table and spoke at the volume of people who want to be overheard but want the plausibility of having been private. A black woman appears with a half-Korean child the same quarter Kwan Holdings posts its highest return in 6 years. A pause for effect. The timing is remarkable, really. Amara was 3 feet away carrying a tray. She set the cups down without a word, walked to the back room, sat down on a crate beside the mop bucket and placed both hands flat on her knees. They were shaking, not from anger, from recognition. She had heard variations of this her entire life. Different words, same architecture. The assumption that a woman like her couldn't simply be loved, that there had to be a calculation, that her presence required an explanation that her absence never would. She sat with it for 43 seconds. Then she stood up, redid her apron, and went back to work. She didn't tell Taehyun. Instead, 2 days later, Amara took the 8:17 a.m. bus to Enwabash Avenue and rode the elevator to the 17th floor of Yates Consulting without an appointment. The receptionist began the standard refusal. Amara looked at her calmly. Tell her Amara is here. She'll know. She was right. She was shown in within 4 minutes. Claire Yates sat behind a glass desk arranged to communicate exactly the right amount of power. She looked at Amara the way people look at things that shouldn't have been able to get this far. Amara placed an envelope on the desk. Inside was a single page, a copy of a financial document that Jason Fu had sent to Taehyun 2 days prior, which Amara had seen when it was left open on the kitchen table. She had asked Jason to explain it. He had after a pause that told her he hadn't expected her to look. I want you to know that I know, Amara said, and I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. She turned and walked out before Claire could arrange her face into a response. In the elevator going down, Amara stared at her own reflection in the polished doors. 7 years. She had survived 7 years of being afraid. She was done conducting herself like somebody who needed permission to exist. That same afternoon, Jason Wu drove 41 miles south to Joliet, Illinois, and knocked on the door of a man named Raymond O. Raymond opened the door 4 inches and tried to close it again immediately. Jason put one hand on the frame, gently, just firmly enough. I'm not here to make trouble for you, he said. I'm here because the truth is already moving. You can be part of it, or you can let it move without you. Raymond kept the chain on. His eyes moved to the street behind Jason, then back. Jason called Taehyun, handed the phone through the gap. Silence on both ends for 3 seconds. Then Raymond O began to talk. He spoke for 91 seconds without stopping. On the night of March 14, 2017, at 2:13 a.m., he had driven Amara from the Kwan residence to a bus terminal on the south side. Soojin had handed him an envelope. He never opened it, never wanted to know the amount. Soojin had told Amara in Raymond's presence that if she attempted to contact Taehyun, people who work for the Kwan family will handle it. Amara had been 26 years old, 11 weeks pregnant. She had no family in Chicago, no money of her own. And she had known exactly what the Kwan name had meant before it meant boardrooms. She had believed the threat because she had every reason to. Raymond's voice broke on the last sentence. I asked God to forgive me many times, he said. I don't know if he has. Taehyun handed the phone back to Jason without speaking. He stood by the car window and looked at a parking lot in Joliet and said nothing for a long time. The following morning brought Diana Lim. She worked now at a small accounting firm in Evanston, a deliberately quiet life. Taehyun understood, built by someone who needed the distance between herself and what she'd once done. She had contacted Jason first. That mattered. She pushed 2 pages across the table. The first was the bank transfer Soojin had shown Taehyun 7 years ago. The document that had confirmed everything he believed about Amara leaving for money. He had seen it once, absorbed it as fact, and never looked at it again. Diana pointed to the second page, the part that had been removed before he ever saw it. The transfer had not stayed in Amara's account. Within 72 hours, it had moved through a holding company registered in Delaware, Kessler Asset Management LLC, and returned in full to Soojin Kwan's private fund. The money had never belonged to Amara. It had never been intended to. It was a prop, a single piece of paper designed to be shown once to a man already primed to believe the worst. I was told it would never surface, Diana said. She looked at the table. I have not slept particularly well since 2017. By evening, Jason arrived at the penthouse with a bundle wrapped in a rubber band. I found these in a storage file linked to your mother's former assistant, he said. He placed the bundle on the glass table and stepped back. 9 of them. Taehyun looked at the handwriting on the top envelope. He recognized it before he touched it. He sat down. He opened the first letter, then the second, then the fourth, and stopped. I am carrying your child. I don't know what to do. I have written this sentence 4 times and deleted it 4 times because I keep hoping you'll walk through the door before I finish. I keep praying you'll come. The room held no sound. The Chicago skyline pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. 41 floors of city that had never once waited for Taehyun Kwan to be ready for anything. His whiskey glass sat untouched on the table beside the letters. 9 envelopes, 7 years. A woman writing in the dark to a man who never received a single word. Taehyun's thumb moved slowly across the ink of the 4th letter. The way a person touches something they cannot take back and cannot put down. He sat there for a long time. The whiskey stayed untouched, the city stayed indifferent, and somewhere 4 miles south, in a small warm house in Bridgeport, a boy named Kai was asleep under thick blankets, dreaming things his father would never be able to give back to him. And then Soojin Kwon made the one move that even Taehyun's patience could not contain. She reached for the only person he was still learning to love. The file Jason had compiled on Soojin Kwon was 43 pages long. Most of it was what Taehyun already knew. The public record of a woman who had built herself into someone no one questioned. But buried in the background material, in the immigration documents and naturalization records and the social history Jason had reconstructed from interviews with people who had known her before Chicago, was a paragraph that Taehyun read 3 times. Soojin had arrived in the United States at 22 years old, newly married, speaking careful English into rooms full of people who had already decided what she was worth. Her husband's American business partners had not been subtle about it. Dinners, where she was not addressed directly. Meetings where her presence was acknowledged the way you acknowledge furniture. 20 years of building the Kwon name into something that demanded to be taken seriously. And underneath all of it, the memory of what it felt like to be looked at and found insufficient before you had spoken a single word. She had not been a monster from the beginning. She had been a woman who survived something, and then made the catastrophic decision to use that survival as a blueprint, to protect her son from the thing that had wounded her by doing it first to someone else. That understanding didn't change what she had done, but it changed the shape of it. Taehyun closed the file, set it beside the 9 letters on the table, looked at both for a moment. Then his phone rang. It was Jason. His voice was 2 registers lower than usual. She sent someone to the house. Taehyun was already moving. The plan had been constructed with Soojin's characteristic precision. Not brute force. She had never needed brute force. A phone call to the Cook County Department of Child and Family Services, placed from a number that traced back to a prepaid account. An anonymous report citing suitable living conditions, and an unverified adult male with known criminal associations present in the home. A follow-up 40 minutes later to a private contact, a woman who had done occasional work for Soojin's former assistant, asking her to arrive in an official-looking capacity before any real caseworker could be dispatched. It was elegant in the way cruelty is sometimes elegant. It used the system as a weapon. It used Amara's blackness as a variable, calculating that a woman of color living in subsidized housing with a child and a wealthy Korean man's involvement would receive less benefit of the doubt, not more. It used Taehyun's own past against him, and it required no confrontation, no fingerprints, nothing that could be traced back cleanly. Soojin had thought of everything, except the badge. Taehyun arrived at the Bridgeport house at 4:23 p.m. The woman was still at the front door, clipboard in hand, speaking to Amara in the measured tone of official process. Kai stood behind Amara, close against her back, holding his puzzle book to his chest with both arms. Taehyun walked past Amara and stood in front of the woman directly. He looked at the badge clipped to her lanyard, Cook County DCFS, District 17B. He had spent enough years operating outside official systems to know exactly how official systems identified themselves. The badge read 17C. He looked at the woman. District 17C doesn't exist, he said quietly. The woman held his gaze for 2 seconds, then looked past him toward the street. Taehyun stepped to his left, blocking her sightline. You have about 4 seconds to make a decision. She made it in 2. Turned and walked quickly to a gray sedan parked 30 feet from the curb. Taehyun memorized the plate and the time it took her to reach the door. He was on the phone to Jason before the car had completed its turn. 40 minutes later, the plate had traced to a rental. The rental had traced to a shell company registered in Indiana. The shell company had traced to a woman named Patricia Sorrell, former assistant to Soojin Kwon, dismissed 14 months ago, apparently never fully severed. Jason, it connects to the same network that held Amara's letters. Taehyun, I know. Inside, the house had gone quiet, the way houses go quiet after something frightening passes through them. Kai sat on the couch, puzzle book in his lap, not doing the puzzle. He was watching Taehyun with the particular attention of a child whose body has registered danger even when his mind hasn't fully named it. Taehyun sat beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a car passed. The heater ran its steady low hum. Amara stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, not because she was cold. Then Kai set the puzzle book on the cushion beside him. He leaned sideways against Taehyun's arm, slowly, testing the weight of it. Then he wrapped both arms around him and pressed his face against his sleeve. Appa. The word came out small and certain, Korean. No one had taught it to him. Children find the words they need the way water finds the lowest point, without instruction, without effort, following something older than language. Taehyun went completely still. One hand moved to the boy's back, carefully, the way you hold something you have just understood the value of and are terrified of handling wrong. His eyes closed. Across the room, Amara's breath came out in a long, uneven line. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, said nothing for a moment, then said everything. I am so tired of being afraid. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I have been afraid since I was 26 years old. I have been afraid every single day, and I am so tired. Not dramatic, not performed, just true, the way things are true when a person finally stops holding them. Taehyun looked at her. The man who had signed the bankruptcy order that morning without looking up. The man who had held boardrooms in silence. That man was not present in this room. I know, he said. And I am sorry, not with money, not with anything I can arrange or acquire or fix from a distance. He held her gaze across the room. I am sorry that I believed what I was shown without asking a single question. I am sorry for every year of it, and from here I will stand. Not because I can undo what happened, I can't, but because the next thing that comes for you will find me first. Amara looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once, slowly. The way you nod when you're not yet ready to trust something, but you're no longer ready to refuse it either. The following morning, Taehyun arrived at Kwan Tower at 7:51 a.m. and had his mother shown to the 41st floor conference room, not his office, not her sitting room, not any space that belonged to her version of their relationship. The evidence was laid across the table in order. Raymond O's recorded statement, Diana Lim's 2 pages, the shell company documentation, the 9 letters still in their envelopes. Soo Jin entered, looked at the table, sat down without being asked. The last autonomous decision she made in that room. She read in silence. The first page, then the second. When she reached the copy of the 4th letter, her hands stopped moving. A single tear dropped onto the paper. She did not wipe it away. The room held no sound except the 41st floor hum of a city that continued, as always, without apology. Taehyun spoke from the window. His back was to her. You used a child's fear as a weapon. You used the system against the mother of my son, and you used my name, the name you spent 30 years building, to make her run from the one person who would have protected her. Soo Jin said nothing. You are removed from every board, every account, every position connected to Kwan Holdings, effective as of this morning. Legal instructions are filed. If you come within 2 blocks of Amara or Kai, I will not extend the protection I have always extended to you. He turned around. Her face had aged in the 10 minutes since she sat down. Something behind it, the thing that had held it in position for 30 years, had quietly given way. You didn't lose this, Taehyun said. You spent it. He walked out. Soo Jin sat alone at the long table, both hands flat on the glass surface. The city outside the window bright and proceeding and completely unaware. On the table in front of her, 9 letters from a young woman she had driven into the dark. Evidence of everything she had constructed, everything she had protected, everything she had destroyed. That night, for the first time in his life, Taehyun Kwan didn't walk toward power. He walked toward something harder to hold and infinitely more worth keeping. Soo Jin Kwan had not been inside a church since her husband's funeral. She found Pastor Ezra Wallace's congregation on S. Western Avenue at 7:14 that evening, not because she had researched it, but because she had driven until she saw a light on inside and a door that wasn't locked. That was as much grace as she felt she could ask for. Pastor Wallace was 71 years old, gray-haired, and possessed of the particular stillness of a man who had heard enough human confession to no longer be surprised by any of it. He was locking the side door when she walked in. He looked at her once, her expensive coat, her careful posture, the thing behind her eyes that she had stopped trying to hide, and said simply, "Sit wherever feels right." She sat in the front pew. She talked for 57 minutes, all of it, Raymond, Diana, the letters, the welfare check. The 30 years of building a name that she had used in the end to destroy the people her son loved most. She did not soften any of it. She had spent decades softening things. She was done. Pastor Wallace listened without interruption. When she finished, he bowed his head briefly. Then he looked at her with eyes that contained neither judgment nor false comfort. Sorrow is the beginning, he said, not the proof. If your repentance is real, stop hiding behind it. Tell the truth. Ask forgiveness. Change while you still have time. Soo Jin looked at the wooden cross above the altar for a long moment. I don't know if I have much of it left, she said. Then don't waste what's there. She returned to the Kwan family home on the north side at 9:38 p.m. The house was exactly as it always had been, quiet, ordered, every surface chosen to communicate a particular kind of success. Soo Jin moved through it without turning on more than one lamp, the one on her writing desk in the private study at the end of the hall. She sat down, placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. Pride fought her the way it always had. It told her this was unnecessary. It told her the damage was done and the gesture was theater. It told her she had nothing to gain. She picked up the pen anyway. She wrote to Taehyun first. It took 4 attempts before she stopped excusing and started confessing. The stage transfer, the threats in Raymond's car, the 9 letters she had intercepted. And placed in a storage file, she told herself, she kept in case they were ever needed for something. Knowing that was a lie, she had told herself so many times it had started to feel like the truth. I turned your grief into a door I couldn't control. I told myself it was protection. It was not. It was fear wearing the costume of love. Then she wrote to Amara. Her hand slowed on that page, stopped twice, continued. I judged your love before I ever learned your name. I called your strength weakness because I was afraid of what it would take from me. You never betrayed this family. I did. I stole years that were not mine to take and I gave them to no one. I only removed them from you. When she reached Kai's name, her handwriting changed. Smaller, more careful, as though the letters themselves understood what they were carrying. Tell the boy that his grandmother was wrong before he could speak a single word. Tell him none of this was his fault. Tell him I prayed at the end that God would still be kind to the family I harmed. Near midnight, she folded the pages and slid them into an envelope. Wrote 2 names on the front, Taehyun, Amara. She would take it herself in the morning. She would not send it through anyone else. She had hidden behind intermediaries long enough. Sujin never reached the Bridgeport house. The call came at 11:17 a.m. the following day. Taehyun was in the kitchen when his phone rang. Amara was at the counter. Kai sat at the table, drawing a ship with careful blue windows. Taehyun answered. His face changed in the way faces change when the news is the kind that doesn't ease in gradually, it simply arrives. Color left his features in a slow, visible tide. Amara set down what she was holding, Taehyun. He lowered the phone, said 2 words. There was an accident. The room went absolutely still. 40 minutes later, a knock at the front door. Taehyun opened it and found Pastor Ezra Wallace standing on the step, holding an envelope in both hands, his eyes carrying the particular sorrow of a man who has served as the bridge between the living and words that arrived too late. She was on her way here, he said softly. She wanted you to have this. They sat together on the couch, Taehyun and Amara, side by side, while Kai remained at the table with his drawing book, coloring the windows of his ship in careful, concentrated strokes, sensing that something important had entered the room and that the right thing to do was stay quiet and let it. Taehyun opened the envelope. He read the first paragraph aloud. His voice held until the 4th sentence, then it didn't. Amara reached over and took the pages from him gently. Let me, she read Sujin's words to Taehyun in a low, steady voice. The confession, the staged evidence, the intercepted letters. The threat in Raymond's car at 2 a.m. on a night Amara had spent the last 7 years trying not to dream about. When she reached the section written to her, she paused for only a moment, then kept going. I called your strength weakness because I was afraid of what it would take from me. She read it without commentary, without performance. She read it the way you read something that is true and painful and also, finally, over. When the letter ended, the room held silence the way a room holds it after the last note of something important. Pastor Wallace spoke softly. The truth has come home. Taehyun lowered his head. Too late. Late truth still matters, Taehyun. Kai looked up from his drawing. Mama? Are you sad? Amara wiped her eyes quickly and turned to him. A little, sweetheart. Kai climbed down from his chair and walked over with his paper. The ship, carefully colored, blue windows bright. He held it out to her. Then you can have this. It's going to a happy place. Amara took the drawing and held it in both hands for a moment before she could speak. Thank you, my love. They buried Sujin Kwan on a Thursday. The sky was pale, the wind was soft and without drama. Pastor Wallace spoke simply at the graveside. A small gathering of household staff, 2 former business associates, and the 3 people Sujin had wronged most, who came anyway, because that is what people with more grace than they were owed sometimes do. We are here not to deny wrong, and not to praise what wounded others. We are here because late truth still matters, and because mercy remains possible while there is breath. Let every heart leave this place choosing what is right before it is too late. The legal consequences followed in the weeks after, methodical and without theater. Claire Yates lost her $2.3 million annual contract with the Kwan Foundation within 11 days. No public statement, no press release, just a letter from the foundation's legal office citing a standard review of partnerships. Raymond O and Diana Lim provided sworn testimony in exchange for immunity. Patricia Sorrell, Sujin's former assistant, faced obstruction charges that carried a maximum of 4 years. The civil action filed on Kai's behalf settled at $8.7 million, held in trust until his 25th birthday. None of it made the front page. Taehyun had not wanted it to. 6 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, Taehyun Kwan sat in the waiting area of a community health clinic on S. Halsted Street. He had no security with him. He had asked them to wait outside, around him. A woman with a toddler on her lap, an older man reading a folded newspaper, a teenager looking at her phone with the practiced boredom of someone pretending not to be nervous. Kai sat beside him, working through a chapter book with a yellow cover. Every few pages he stopped to ask what a word meant. Taehyun answered each time without looking at his phone. Amara was finishing her shift. She had passed her nursing license reinstatement hearing six weeks earlier, the false report that had stripped her credentials formally expunged from the record, the board's decision unanimous. She had started at the clinic on a Monday morning and come home that evening without saying much, which was how Tae Han-yoon had learned to recognize when something mattered to her most. An older woman across the waiting room was watching him. He noticed. He always noticed. He recognized the particular look of someone who knew the name Kwon and was trying to reconcile the stories attached to it, with the man sitting in a plastic chair, reading a child's definition of the word harbor. He didn't explain himself. He didn't need to. The door at the end of the hall opened and Amara walked out in her scrubs, coat over one arm, looking tired in the way that comes from work that matters. She saw them. Something in her face settled. "Mama, I learned what harbor means. Tell me on the way home," she said. They walked out into the April evening together. Not as a completed thing, not as a healed thing, but as three people who had found their way back to each other through the kind of wreckage that doesn't fully clear. The city moved around them without interest. Taehyun Kwon did not reach for his phone, did not check the markets, did not think about the 41st floor or the quarterly report or the name he had spent 14 years making mean something in rooms full of serious people. He held the door open. That was enough. This is where I want to stop and ask you something. Because this story wasn't just about power or money or even betrayal. It was about what happens when fear becomes a weapon in the hands of someone who was supposed to protect love. Soojin Kwon was not born cruel. She was a woman who survived real wounds and then passed them on deliberately to someone who had done nothing except love her son without apology. Taehyun was not a villain. He was a man who believed what he was shown because believing otherwise was harder than the alternative. And Amara never stopped being who she was. 7 years. Alone. Working, raising a child who drew pictures of a family that hadn't existed yet. So here is what I want to ask you. Who carried the greatest weight of responsibility in this story? Was it Soojin? For building a lie with such care and intention? Was it Taehyun? For never asking the one question that would have unraveled everything? Or was it the system itself? The one that made it so easy to use against a woman like Amara, and so easy for her silence to be mistaken for absence? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story reached something in you, if you've ever been the person whose letters didn't arrive, or the person who believed the wrong thing for too long, tell me that too. Those conversations matter more than any algorithm. If you're new here, subscribe. Every story on this channel is built for the people who believe that truth, even when it's late, still matters. Like this video if Kai giving Amara that drawing made you feel something you weren't prepared for. And I'll see you in the next one.
That's the end of today's story here on Channel Mafia Stories. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. It genuinely means a lot. Now I have to ask, are you team him or team her? Drop it in the comments. I want to see which side wins. If this story kept you hooked, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. See you soon.